Good afternoon, everyone. I can see lots of people currently joining us through Zoom at the moment. So welcome to everyone, wherever you are. My name is Lucie McLean. I am a product director at Zalando and also a long-time member of the Product Management Festival board. So I'm really excited that you're here today because we've got some really interesting stuff to talk about. Today, I'm welcoming two guests to help us address something that we came across in the Product Management Festival Trends and Benchmarks report. There was a really interesting nugget of insight there that I think is a really good topic for a conversation from multiple angles. So we've hand selected two guests who we know are really passionate and experienced in this topic. So let's dive into that. So the source of our information was the Product Management Festival Trends and Benchmarks report. This is something that we do every year. And in the latest version, more than 2,000 product managers took part. And this is a way for us to kind of test the temperature of product management, how people feel about their careers, how's product management developing as a discipline. So we had more than 2,000 people tell us about their personal experiences, how they feel about the discipline, people from more than 30 countries. So we got some great insight from that. There are a couple of areas where we could find some really interesting information that I think can be really valuable, both for product leaders and for product managers. And it was about product leadership and how people feel about the development of their careers. And this stat I'm sharing here is really interesting. Nearly half of the respondents said that there was an opportunity for their product leaders to give them more growth opportunities. You know, that's a really big proportion. So we thought that was really interesting. And there was another statistic that we found that really showed the value of this work. 34% of people said they'd actually left a job because of this, because they weren't given an opportunity to grow. So I think that just sums up how important this topic is. And to me, it felt like a really good chance to have a discussion about this area. So that's what we're going to do today. Just to share a little bit more information about the report and ways to get involved with the Product Management Festival. This report has more than 50 charts in it, with the insight I mentioned, plus lots more things that you might find relevant. So if you're interested, you can download the survey. I'll mention as well that after our session today, we will follow up with an email so you can get the link. So don't worry if you don't catch this now. And a few more things to tell you about the Product Management Festival for anybody who is new to us. So obviously we publish this report. We also host physical and virtual events for product executives, product managers. We run a product management executive program with INSEAD in San Francisco, Paris, and Singapore. And of course, we have our conferences, which is really kind of how we started. So we run our events in Zurich and Singapore. And the next event coming up is our Zurich Conference in November. Now, obviously, given to current circumstances, we're running this in a different way this year. We're going to be running a hybrid event. So for those of you who are able and want to take part in a physical event, you're able to join us in Zurich. And for those of you who want to join us remotely, you can also take part, experience all the great sessions. That'll be possible as well. So again, we'll send you more information on this. We also, to say thank you for joining us today, we have a 20% discount code if you're interested in joining us this year. So that's a little bit about why we're gathered here today. And I said, we'll follow up with information. I will stop sharing my screen and we will invite, I'll introduce our guests today. So our guests are two people that I think would be great to talk about this topic with. So first up, we have Jock Busuttil, who is a product leader from the UK. He's a freelance head of product based near London. He's the author of the Product Manager's Practitioner's Guide. He runs the blog I Manage Products. And in 2012, he founded Product People Limited, a product management consultancy, coaching and training company. He spent nearly 2 decades working with tech companies to improve their product management practices, from startups to multinationals. His clients include the BBC, the University of Cambridge, and the UK's Ministry of Justice and Government Digital Service. So lots of interesting companies there. He's a longtime friend of the PMF, and I actually met Jock at the very first Product Management Festival back in 2013, which feels about 1 million years ago now. So yeah, so welcome, Jock. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
And our second guest is Daniil Pavliuchkov, who is also based in Berlin, like myself. He's a Berlin-based product leader. He started his own found up in 2014 called Mailburn. And for the last few years, he's been leading product teams in fintech companies in Berlin. He's currently senior product manager at a super interesting company, Tier, which provides e-scooters and e-mopeds for rent in more than 70 European cities. He's also a friend of the Product Management Festival. He spoke over the last 2 years about how to develop product management culture across your organization and how to grow and develop your product team. Recently, he also created Product Therapy, a group to help other PMs develop missing skills and unlock their growth opportunities through one-to-one mentoring sessions. I love the idea of product therapy, and hopefully we can have a little bit of therapy today as a group on this topic. So that's a little bit about us, our organisation and our guests. Before we dive in, we'd also love to know a little bit more about you, our guests today, to find out why you're here. So this topic of product management growth is something that can be approached from multiple angles, whether you're a product leader looking to develop your team, or whether you're a product manager thinking about your own growth development, or maybe both, or maybe something else. So we want you to take part in a really simple poll, one click, which we're going to present on the screen now through the magic of Zoom. Please tell us why you're here, and that'll just help us judge a little bit how to make sure this session is as valuable for you as possible. How are we doing? So looking at the numbers, I think we're fairly complete. Yeah, quite an even mix. So Jock and Daniil, can you see that? So you can see who our attendees are. Great, I think that's really valuable. So quite a good mix of people thinking about their own career growth, their own teams, and a little bit of both. That's fantastic, thank you. Okay, we can stop sharing that now, and let's have a think about how to shape our content around that. I will close that poll. Okay, so product management growth and growth opportunities, an absolutely enormous topic. And I think what I'd like to do first is just talk about what it means to you, so just to understand the different lenses we can look at it through. So Jock, starting with you and your experience in larger organizations, can you tell us a little bit about what product management growth means for you and what it can look like?
So what it should look like is opportunities for product managers to become more senior in responsibility, so looking after maybe more complex or larger numbers of products in the portfolio, but also to grow in terms of leadership, so being able to have more of a responsibility for the development of the other product managers in their team. And in an ideal world, that should look like a reasonably clear career path, so you know how you're going to progress with an organization. But I think the problem is that I think maybe highlighted in that survey, in the survey results you showed earlier, is that often it just simply isn't considered. People don't realize that they need to provide a career path or a clear career path for product managers in their organization.
Thanks, Jock. And Daniil, thinking about your experience with startups, both with your own and the ones that you've worked at, what kind of lens can we also look at this through in that sort of situation as well?
I think that growth is an ongoing process that directly connects to innate desire of every single product manager to be as competent as possible. So this is a process of being more professional, as Jock said, with functional skills, with leadership skills, and also being more confident in yourself, which should not happen like over years and then you just suddenly get a promotion, but that's a process that you should feel every week or every month, that you're actually changing, you're becoming more competent than before. And that could be through missing skills, if you handle more communication or more complex projects, if you have tricky dependencies and priorities that can resolve. So there are multiple ways to do that. And that really depends on what kind of product manager you are and in which directions you want to develop in the future.
Great, thank you. And I forgot to mention as well that whilst it's a conversation between the three of us, we'd really welcome your questions. So if you have any questions you want us to consider throughout the conversation, please add them in the chat. We'll get to them if we can, but we'll also leave some time at the end, during which point you're welcome to ask, questions that haven't quite come up through the flow. You can unmute yourself and ask those, but you're also welcome to ask them in the chat. So we'll leave time for that. So get involved if you'd like to. I'd also be keen to follow up both with Jock and Daniil. Tell us something about your career. Tell us a story about how you've experienced product management growth and what it's meant for you in your career. So maybe Daniil, you could start us off.
So that's a story that really felt like a revelation. And that was an aha moment for me when I finally understood what it means, the famous circle of build, measure, and learn, and how exactly you use it as a product manager. Because before I was stuck in this, I think, quite a common way of working when you just build something and you have this partnership coming up and you build integration for that. You have bugs and you go and build a fix for them. You have a functionality that should be like a history of your actions and you know how it looks like. So you are just constantly building something. And then at some point we faced a problem that we didn't really know how to approach. It was connected with failed payments and fraudulent activity. And there was no one solution to fix it. There was no new functionality that would just solve all of our problems. So we decided to just try something. And we built a small piece of functionality. We ran it as an experiment and we looked at results. It kind of worked, but not in every case. So we built a second experiment. And we did it 3 or 4 times. And after a while, in the end, we got a lot of learnings. And we ended up with the solution that reduced the fraud level in our use case by 10 times, which was amazing. And when I looked back and did the retrospective, I thought that, wow, it's such an amazing way of doing things. When you don't know what would be the best solution, you try something out, you get feedback. And this is the build, measure, learn cycle. And what I felt at the moment that I'm never going back to the old way. Even if the functionality does not give you enough space to come up with an experiment, you still should avoid being like in a solutionizing mode and try to think about experiments and hypotheses that you can try to get some results in a very deep and cheap and easy way, and then see what they tell you. So that was very interesting, and yeah.
So if you had to kind of replicate those learnings, if you have to extract what worked there and kind of turn that into some gold dust to share with our guests today, how would you explain what happened there and how they could perhaps replicate the experience?
I think that's more about the changing of the mindset. So it's trying something that you are not doing normally in your day-to-day work. So of course, everyone is used to like writing tickets, building features, deploying, testing, and so on. But this was a new behavior, new way of doing things. And actually, like I could have done it earlier, but there was no good opportunity for that. And when the opportunity happened, it was very interesting to try and catch it and see actually what can be achieved with a different way of doing things. So I think that a lot of people in general, they try to avoid things that they don't really understand or they don't like. So like you shouldn't go further than, I don't know, having a bad relationship and you are not looking at it in your face because it's just not working. Same with product management. If you have something that's you try to avoid and it doesn't feel good or you struggle with it, probably there is some point that can be an inflection point and a start of a very nice growth path. If you just face it and look it in the eye and have enough courage to really ask yourself a question, okay, why am I not doing that? Why am I always falling back to the usual way of doing things and I'm not trying this new way? Is it like, should I grow or is it this new way is not just good enough? And like try to be honest with this and do some retrospective on the personal level. And that might lead to a very interesting conclusion and feelings.
So that sounds like you're identified there that those points where you feel uncomfortable or you're avoiding things are actually probably the times at which you could identify, oh, this is something I could learn from. Yeah.
But also that depends on what kind of product manager you are. So for example, if you're a PM that likes to build your own vision and develop a project or a product in your own way, you're avoiding, let's say, marketing or sales or competitive analysis, that's quite strange, because to build a vision that's competitive, you need to know what happens on the market. But if and that could be your inflection point for growth. But if you're a PM that's perfectly okay to get a vision from someone else, like a leader, a visionary from your company, from C-level, and you just execute on this vision and you know how to build it and deliver it perfectly, then having a lot of marketing inside is not really necessary for you to be a good PM. So that also depends on what kind of culture and setup and organization you are right now. And yeah, you should see how it is for yourself. There is no one rule that will apply to everyone.
Great, thank you. And Jock, would love you to share some insight from your career. Tell us about a time when you've experienced product management growth and what you learned from that.
So I think there was kind of 2 big eye-openers for me. The first was when I suddenly realized that I probably knew more about product management, having literally just started as a product manager for the first time, than the company I was working at did. So kind of the revelation that product management was something that was quite new and a relative unknown to most companies was a particular thing. So it kind of meant that I had more of a responsibility to make sure I was doing product management the best way I could do. And when I started out, it was very much along the lines of there was a particular process, a particular methodology, and it was kind of very rigid in that way. And then so the really big revelation was when I suddenly realized through exposure to things like the government digital service in the UK, agile methodologies that I hadn't necessarily come across before, that there was actually a way of being far more user-centric about things, and that you didn't have to follow the process rigidly. You could actually determine what it was you were trying to achieve and then figure out what the best way of achieving it was. And that was quite a big revelation at the time. Now looking back, it's like, well, how on earth did we manage to do it at all? But then you sort of see all of these different products that companies create that just kind of push along down the path to launch without really any consideration of what problem they're trying to solve for which groups of people. So for me, that kind of revelation about the most important thing is the focus on the users. Process is largely irrelevant. Process is there to help you, not to control you. And starting from that basis really was, I think, probably the big turning point for me.
Great, thank you. And I want to kind of approach this question from the perspective of a product leader and what product leaders can do. So with that hat on, I want to pick up on a couple of questions in the comments. So as a product leader, how do you create growth opportunities for your team? What can that look like? And obviously one way is becoming a people manager, but what other ways are there that we can approach this? And also, how do you measure product management growth? Jock, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, let's, well, there's plenty of ways. One way that may be a little bit controversial is to deliberately mix up the product managers and their products from time to time. So rather than necessarily, whilst there are benefits and advantages to having a product manager working on a particular product for a long time, and obviously the domain knowledge that they pick up whilst doing that, there is, I think, also an advantage to deliberately swapping product managers around so that they bring their own distinct perspective onto different products. And I think that's one way to encourage growth, because it kind of forces people a little bit out of their comfort zones, forces them to kind of start learning again, to consider other things, but also the effect that they have on the teams by delivery teams by bringing that different perspective in can be quite helpful. So I think that's one way. I think another way is to make sure that there are opportunities for people to learn from each other. So I'm a very big fan of kind of peer-to-peer learning, so communities of practice and that kind of thing, where actually rather than the product leader, in inverted commas, being the person that tells the team how they should be good product managers, I, to be honest, learn far more from the team of product managers that I've looked after than I would have been able to share with them as a leader. So setting up a good community of practice where you can take advantage of that kind of exponential growth in learning from lots of product managers sharing with each other, I think is one of the most useful ways to get growth happening in your organization.
And can we go back to that point about swapping people around teams? Because I think that's one thing that when that option is presented to product managers, it might be quite hard to identify really what that can add rather than just doing the same things again that I already do. So really, what do you think are the specific values, the specific value in doing that is, just so that anyone who's on the call as a product manager who might be in that situation, or as a product leader thinking about that as a potential option for someone in their team, what do you think the real benefits of doing that are?
I think the main one is that ideally, multiple products in your organization's portfolio should be tackling different problems at the very least, if not for different groups of people, but certainly they should be different problems. And so in that regard, being able to, or being forced in a way to consider the problem in a different way, or to think about a new problem rather than continually optimizing the one you've previously been used to, can be a way of kind of slightly freeing up your thinking and meeting different challenges. I think it's really all about that idea of getting stuck in a rut. And I found that when I was working on products for 2-3 years at a time, that after a while you'd almost kind of go into kind of automation mode, in the sense that you've kind of been there, done that, got the t-shirt, and you're not really having to think too hard. You're seeing the same problems, you're meeting them the same way, you're making the product slightly better, but you're not really having to think too hard about it. And what I really wanted to do is to avoid that stagnation setting in with other product managers, and throwing them at a different product which is solving a different problem, possibly for an entirely different group of people. I felt was a really useful way of shaking up the thinking and getting people learning again.
So it gives them exposure to different domains, different teams. And I think it's a way to stress test your toolkit, isn't it? If you've always worked with stakeholders in one specific way, it gives you a chance to see if that works for other people with other ways of thinking and other priorities. And you have to stress test that and build confidence in what works, and then kind of expand your range of doing things. Because I guess for more senior product managers, you're looking for them to have a range of tools and to be able to explain why they use the ones they use at those points. And realistically, you can only get that when you've been in a few different scenarios and seen some things work and some things not.
Absolutely. I mean, that's one of the main reasons why I went freelance back in 2012, was because I wanted to go from that sort of self-stagnation that I identified to working with a different organization every few months, because that was the best way for me to kind of get learning again.
And there's a great comment coming through in the chat that this part is actually quite difficult for some people to recognize in their careers, because growth is quite often equated with promotion. But actually sometimes promotion only comes when you've got that range of experience and demonstrate that you're ready. So maybe there's a few more of those experiences under your belt will make that promotion more likely in the future, rather than the promotion being the way to get that.
Yes. Maybe it's like if you stand still for too long, you kind of become a bit camouflaged and hard to see. So you have to jump around a bit to kind of make yourself more visible in the organization.
Yeah. And kind of approaching that question, Daniil, as well, another aspect that people sometimes think about is the only way to kind of grow as a product manager is to become a people manager. So again, what are the other options you can suggest there? And actually, if people management is the way to do it, what are your thoughts on how a product leader can approach giving someone the opportunity to develop those skills to see if they're ready?
Yeah, I think that when you say product leader, it doesn't mean product team leader. So it's two different things. You can be a leader of the product, and it's a bit different from being a product manager. So it's not about building things. It's about creating a vision of what it's going to be in the future, so you know in which direction to go, and then you tell everyone else in an inspiring way that this is the best direction we should do. And becoming a product leader in your organization without becoming a people manager, I think it's a very nice opportunity that not a lot of people know about it. And it's more about getting enough room and responsibility to own a specific direction of the product or specific part of the product, to a way that you have a bigger impact with your actions. So you really go into, how do I make more revenue? How do I make revenue in the ways that are hard to copy for my competitors? How I collaborate with different organizational departments in the organization. How do I do it together with marketing? How can I package it in a way that it sells well? And this level of complexity is completely new to a lot of PMs, because it's not about talking to your developers and your designers to build a feature. It's about how you do the product and you lead it into the bright future. And that's what it is, a product leader. You don't have to be managing a group of 10 PMs to be there. And a lot of companies, I think, would be happy if there is a PM that is willing to take this level of responsibility, because that's a completely new set of tasks. It's a lot more communication, a lot more prioritization. And that's a very nice way to grow if you don't want to be a manager.
So just thinking about the kind of role of almost a principal product manager, it's something that we've seen in engineering, that it seems to be quite accepted to have very senior individual contributor engineers who are real domain experts, who are driving best practice, but not through people management, through kind of real sort of domain knowledge and expertise in their skill set. So that feels like something that there's maybe opportunities for more organizations to embrace, and for product managers to realize that that is a career path if people management isn't the way they want to go.
Yeah, you can grow in domain expertise. You can really know a lot about, so I work in mobility, and if I want to grow as a PM, I really need to know inside and outside the mobility including the sourcing and how Chinese factories are doing our scooters, how we work with IT and hardware, and this really go deeper and deeper to uncover an opportunity for the product to grow in a way that no one expects. And that's really comes with a lot of expertise, with a lot of knowledge, and with a lot of focus and concentration on specifically your part of the product. And that's way different from managing people. And it's still growth, still development.
Yeah, and Jock, going back to the comment you made earlier about communities of practice, there's also an opportunity for product managers there to become the expert in a part of product management too. Is there something that they really passionately care about, that they can be setting best practice and kind of leading and becoming a thought leader that way as well?
Absolutely. I mean, hopefully people have been familiar with the concept of either the T-shaped person or the pie-shaped person. So in other words, you have a generalist kind of coverage of a number of different topics to help you be a product manager. But because of your own particular background, you might have a particular specialism that you can bring to the role. In my case, I happen to come from a relatively technical kind of IP networking background, because that happened to be the first company I worked at of university. And I occasionally scare developers on my team by knowing far more than I should do about very specific things. But you know, in terms of taking the benefits of that, if all of the product managers in your team come from differing backgrounds, whether it's design, user research, technical or development backgrounds, or indeed something completely outside of, you know, the usual areas, so maybe psychology or things like that, then absolutely you want them to be able to help share around that information and that experience and that knowledge with the other members in their team, so that everyone can get a bit better at the technical stuff, which might be a gap for them, or everyone can get a bit better at user research if that's a gap for them, or everyone can get a bit better at understanding development methodologies and frameworks if that's a gap for them. So I think, yeah, absolutely. The strength of the communities is because it relies and takes advantage of the natural diversity that you'd expect to see within a team. And it makes the team much greater than the sum of its parts if they're all acting just purely as individuals focused only on their own products.
So you mentioned there about identifying gaps, and there was a question right at the start of our talk today about how you measure product management growth. So Jock, I know this is something that you've thought about before. So how can a product leader or a manager of product managers kind of measure or explain how they measure product management, and also how can product managers measure how they're doing and where their gaps might be? I know this is something that you've done some interesting work on it in the past.
Thank you. Yes. So the first thing is I wanted to differentiate between the performance of a product and the performance of its product manager. So in other words, how could I concentrate on the development, the personal development of the individual, rather than necessarily whether their product was making revenue and that kind of thing. And the way I happened to do this was to get all of the members of my team, first of all, to agree on what the most important traits were of a product manager, both in terms of technical skills, you know, so what technical skills do you need to be a product manager in our organization, but also what are the soft skills, you know, what kind of emotional intelligence did they need to be able to be an effective product manager. So once we agreed on these categories, we all just did a very simple scoring exercise, 1 to 5, you know, on how they rated themselves on these particular areas. And then we collated those results, and that was kind of interesting, and that gave me you know, useful things to focus on in one-to-ones if they felt that they were not so great in a particular area, or if they felt they were particularly good, they could share that experience, and I'd encourage them to kind of almost present to the rest of the team something they were expert on. But where it became really, really interesting was when I did the same exercise using the same traits and got their respective delivery teams, so the developers, designers, the user researchers, whoever was in their delivery team, to score their product manager on the same terms. And seeing where the differences were was kind of interesting. One of two things would happen. Either the product managers would be almost lacking confidence in their own abilities and be scoring themselves really low in an area that the team thought they were really good at, or sometimes you get the other case happening where maybe some were overconfident in their abilities, and actually the team saying, yeah, you're not so good at that, you should really maybe, you know, put a bit more focus and attention into being better at that. And obviously it was all done anonymously, so I didn't want any, you know, people kind of making a big deal about it. But it was interesting to see where a product manager's self-view matched up with how they were perceived by their team, who they work most closely with, and where they were out of alignment. And that was useful in itself.
So there's a few parts out there that are quite interesting. I guess a lot of companies have a set of product management role expectations. So I guess the first thing is to find out if your company does. Have a look at them and see if you understand them. But underneath that, it sounds like you also do a piece of work there for the team themselves to reflect on those expectations if they exist, and just see, actually, to do that job here in this team on this product, what is important? What are the things that we as a group need to know? And then from there, you do your team reflection and your self-reflection. And then through that, identify what comes next.
Absolutely. It's kind of mindfulness. I think it's one of those things where we're so busy that we don't actually spend that much time reflecting on how well we are doing our jobs. I mean, sometimes we're kind of given a rude awakening when we're told quite bluntly when we're not doing it well. But it's kind of nice to make sure there's good alignment between the product manager, what the organization's expectations are, how the team is working, what their expectations are, and just having some kind of thing. You don't need to do this very often. Maybe no more than once a quarter, maybe only every 6 months would be sufficient, just as a kind of temperature check. But it's quite valuable. And also, I think when you start to look at it over a series of, over a period of time, then saying, last quarter we saw that you weren't so great at public speaking. Since then, you've done in your personal goals several more talks. How do you feel about public speaking now? Are you a bit more confident in it? Has it had the desired effect? So it's almost taking the experimental approach that Daniil was talking about earlier and applying it to your own personal development. I think lots of people have said, treat yourself like a product. And I think experimentation and, measuring yourself and being, forcing yourself to be honest about, are you actually getting better at this, or are you just still putting it to one side and being uncomfortable about it, like Daniil was saying, is something we should keep an eye on.
Great, thank you. And there's some great advice coming through the chat of a website with the PM wheel on it you could use to kind of understand the skill set. Another one I've used before is the PM Daisy. So there are a couple of different tools you can use to kind of unpick, what makes up a good product manager, what's important, and can identify where the gaps might be. So going back to Daniil, we're going to put you in a situation now. You're a product manager. You've done this analysis. You've found your uncomfortable spots. You've identified some things where you want to grow. How do you have that conversation with your manager? How do you get that space to do these things? What kind of persuasive arguments can you make?
So it's funny because I did it a month ago for myself with my manager, so I can share my recent experience. And basically, we have this personal development plan that has a matrix of skills, and then you have functional skills like technical understanding, UX simplicity, consumer science, and so on. We also have a section that it's about leadership and vision and business maturity. And then you have a third section, which is about company values. So what the company in general thinks is important for employees. And that could be, I don't know, I care about my teams and I care about my users, or it could be I maximize revenue. And there is no right or wrong answer, because depending on the company, you can have different priorities, and also the same company can have different priorities in different stages of the company, or like now is Corona crisis, everything is to reduce our costs. And this is the priority. And then afterwards, okay, everything is scale. No one cares about costs. Everything is just dumping a lot of cash on the gas pedal. So when you score yourself, either with the team or with 360 degrees, like whatever you use, and you have a reflection, you discuss it with the manager, and basically you come up where you want to be in the next 6 months, because it's a good cadence to repeat it twice a year. And the tricky part is you kind of want to get better at everything, but you can't, because you have only so limited amount of hours per week. And even if you work 40 hours a week, you still need some time to develop yourself. And I found out that people don't really do that in the evening, because they just want to relax and they have their families and friends and hobbies. So you don't have more than a couple of hours every week to dedicate to your personal growth outside of your regular responsibilities. And it's important to be very realistic about it, that you can touch not more than one skill a month. But if you have set a specific goal, so if you want to be more technical, you can set a goal. I want to do 5 commits to our repository this month. So I need to know how the code works. I need to learn microservices, database, and so on. I need to write it, install it, connect it on my local environment, and I push it, and then it goes through review. And that would be and evidence that I have increased in this skill. So that should be not about like, yeah, I'm going to spend more time focusing on my leadership skills. That's not going to work. You have to come up with an actionable plan, and you should create it and co-create it together with your manager, and then get support and buy-in and sponsorship, both from way like, if you fail, it's okay, I will support you, but also here I can offload you, you can dedicate more hours to that because I also want you to grow. So you need to discuss agree on the terms of your growth and how much you can dedicate to that, and have an actionable plan. And then you measure and you learn, and you go through this experimentation approach that Jock mentioned. It works really well with personal growth as well. So you can treat it as a micro product, and you are your own product manager.
Nice. And Ruth has mentioned her organization, they use OKRs for individual development as well. So I guess that can really keep that focus on the things that add value, but making sure it stays on your to-do list, which is really nice. That's great. And I think another thing that's important is that we expect product managers to be very proactive. You know, that's one of the really important skills, and actually being proactive in your own career development is a great way to demonstrate that. And it's, you know, shows your leaders that you're both a proactive person, but you're also proactive in developing your own product yourself as well. So another aspect that's come up in the chat as well is about the role of coaching and mentoring here. So I'd love to hear both your thoughts on that, where you think it could add value, and really how to make the most of those opportunities, because everyone's busy. So how can you really use coaching and mentoring to best effect in developing as a product manager? So maybe it will go to Jock first, and then Daniil on this one. Jock, what are your thoughts here?
So I think the first thing is whether or not there's actually someone in your organization that you can have a one-to-one coaching session with. I think particularly my experience of getting involved is that often there's no senior product person in an organization, or the product manager that I'm talking to is, you know, the only one there, and their organization doesn't even understand what they do. So I think the first thing is identify if you've got someone you can actually have a sensible coaching session with. And then ideally that person should be someone who can at least provide a different perspective and challenge maybe some of your thought processes. Not necessarily, you don't necessarily want to have the kind of relationship where someone is telling you what to do in a very directive manner. But I think, you know, occasionally saying, well, you know, have you tried thinking about it this way? Or how well did that work out for you? Did you think about trying it maybe a different way and seeing if we get a different result? So I think, you know, the one-to-one coaching is useful, but I think it's part of a number of different things you need to be doing as part of your growth. I think the one-to-ones are useful, and I think Daniil is probably far better, you know, qualified to talk about the product therapy side of things. But the there's always going to be two things, which is kind of, you know, solving the immediate challenges, solving the almost kind of mental challenges or the stress related stuff that you tend to get in one-to-ones, but then coupling that with more the peer-based stuff or the community-based stuff, where it's a bit more it's less about poor me, and it's more about, okay, what can I do to actually push things along. One of the things I found quite useful was to have kind of a running set of almost goals or key objectives, key results, and for individuals from a personal development point of view, saying, you know, for example, I want to get better at public speaking. So that's great. So let's agree that, you know, between now and the end of the month, you do at least 2 more speaking opportunities, and we'll encourage you to do that. And then reviewing, you know, how did that make them feel at the end of the process. So trying to keep it as objective as possible, and not purely about the you know, isn't product management quite hard? Yes, it is. Sort of side of things. So yeah, I think that's probably how I'd see the coaching working, but it needs to be done in combination with other things, and really you need someone who's going to challenge you and encourage you to step outside of your comfort zone.
And I guess if that person isn't in your organization, there are other ways to do that. So I guess Daniil can tell us about his work as well. There are other mentoring clubs and other ways to kind of find mentors as well. So definitely worth thinking about those. So yes, Daniil, do share a little bit more about, you know, your thoughts on this and how you're seeing this.
So I think the relationship between the mentor and the person go through different stages, and the growth of the process that has basically 4 steps. The first one, you need to build trust, and you need to get involved in another person's problem. Because if you say, like, you see that the person is smoking a lot, and then you say smoke is bad for your health, and like another person is not stupid. He or she knows that smoking is bad for the health, and they went through this mental exercise many times. So you should not be like directive and just, you know, have this fixer attitude that I know the solution will help you become a better person. So you get to have to build trust that you are not facing this wall of skepticism when you say something. And this is the first stage to get to know another person, to build a relationship that's meaningful with them. The second one, and when you start talking about different growth opportunities, you need as a product leader to focus people on the ones that are most relevant, because you have many different opportunities and you don't know which one will bring the most value. And you also, at the moment as a PM, probably you don't really know what kind of PM you are. What are your own personal product values? So the product leader or a partner will be able to focus you, and instead of going into some strange direction, slightly return you to the way. So the second part is focusing on a specific problem. And when you see this problem or opportunity or issue, the third stage is to get motivation to improve that. Because if you just give a solution, it's like a present, but you never grow if you receive a present. You only grow if you do the hard part yourself. So you need to do the thinking and you need to do the doing. And it takes a lot of courage. And to have courage, you need to have motivation to fix it. So you really need to understand why doing that will improve your life, and you will be a better PM. You will have less stress from your work. Your products will improve and your colleagues will love you, and everyone will want to work on your team. So this is a motivational part. This is a third stage. And the last one, which is usually in many cases the first one, but it should be definitely the last one, is the planning part. When you actually come up with the plan, how you do the growth. So before going to those actionable items, you need to first get involved with another person. You need to focus them. You need to bring motivation and courage out of them, support them, and then you plan together and you do the steps and actions. And of course, every of those stages, they overlap. They don't happen consecutively. They run in parallel, more or less. And it's like everyone is building on top of the previous one. So this is how I see a job of a product leader to unlock the growth of a PM.
Lots to do there, isn't there?
Yeah, it's not easy. And you really need to build this trust relationship, because otherwise you're going to be a stranger to them and your words will not go through this internal skeptical filter.
Yeah, super interesting stuff. Thank you. I think we've galloped through lots of themes today from lots of different angles. So we're going to pause for breath now, and then want to ask everyone who's attending today if there's anything you'd want to dig into a little bit more through a question or any other areas you'd like us to explore. So yeah, great question just come in here, going back to Jock and Daniil about your own career. So what do you think the most relevant factors are that have helped you become product leaders today?
I think for me, I really started talking a lot about it, and I started reading a lot about it and about things that are connected to that. So product management, for me personally, is very close to psychology, for example. So I started reading about consultation practices, motivational practices, how you help other people develop. And that gave me a lot of insights, and that actually formed my personal position on how product management should be working, and what it actually means, how a person that has the 2 or 3 years of experience is building a product and affecting a revenue of the company, and might change the strategy of the product and change the strategy of the company in some way. And that's just a person with 2 or 3 years of experience, and it's not even EC level. How does that work, and why it's working in many organizations? So talking to other people outside of PM world, talking to other PMs as well, is what helped me understand what I value. And when you like hear another person, you see, oh, I agree with that, or no, this is not what I share in this opinion. So doing that more often just helped me understand more about what kind of person I am in this particular dimension of product management.
Super interesting. And same question to you, Jock. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think the thing that shaped me most, one was being thrown into lots of different things, lots of different problems to solve. When I started working out of university, I went and joined a startup, and this was around about sort of early, right at the beginning of the millennium, if that doesn't date me too much. And being a startup, which then went through the dot-com bubble bursting and most of the company being laid off, I suddenly found myself responsible for a whole bunch of things that I wouldn't otherwise have had access to. So I was the marketing department and the IT department and the receptionist and the person giving product training. And whilst I wasn't necessarily the product manager at that point, I did get exposure to a lot of things, and suddenly I just had to get good at stuff. So I think that helped me kind of grow as a product person, just having to take responsibility for getting stuff done, but also having to learn about the fact that you don't know a lot of stuff, and you have to be given the opportunity to learn about that. And so encouraging the people I look after to try out new things and not be afraid of failing or being perceived to fail just because you don't get it right first time. That's okay, it doesn't matter. So that's been really helpful. And I think the other really big insight was when I sort of sat down with myself and said, right, I'm going to become a team manager soon. I'm going to be looking after product managers. From my own experiences of being managed well and badly, what kind of product leader, what kind of product team manager do I want to be for the people in my team? In other words, how can I avoid making the same mistakes that my managers sometimes made with me? And how do I need to be helpful in different ways based on different personalities and differing needs of the individuals in my team? So in the same way as we kind of regard our own personal growth as a product, I regarded each of the team members that I was looking after as my users. And I had to understand their needs to understand how I could solve their problems or help them to solve their own problems. So that was kind of another big revelation for me.
Great, thank you. Ruth has just made me realise we are 48 minutes into a webinar and we haven't mentioned working from home or lockdown. I don't know how we managed that. Maybe it's just it's not a thing, but it is a thing, right? And it has changed things, and it definitely changes the kind of conversations we have about growth and the relationships between teams and understanding each other. So let's talk about that, because it is definitely a thing and will be a thing for much longer. So yes, quick question to you both, starting with you, Jock. Has this changed our how we approach these conversations? Are there things we should bear in mind and proactively do differently while we're not able to go to the coffee shop and have these conversations with our bosses?
So it's a really weird one, because I'm kind of used to managing teams that were geographically distributed anyway. If anything, it's just become slightly easier. I appreciate not everyone is necessarily used to managing remote teams and so on and so forth, but I find that a video call is a bit better than just a plain phone call. And I was doing quite a lot of the one-to-one sessions over a phone call anyway. So actually being able to do coaching sessions, one-to-one sessions over a video call is actually quite good. I appreciate that if your norm is, getting together in an office and being able to nip out for a nice coffee somewhere from the office, then it's a bit of a change. But in some respects, at least from the one-to-one side of things, I don't think it's really fundamentally changed too much. I think where it has changed is the experience of being near other people in a working environment. And it's a very difficult kind of sense or feeling to put your finger on, because it's all of the stuff. It's kind of the bits where it's quiet and everyone's getting busy, and that's kind of quite a nice library like almost atmosphere. And then sometimes just silliness erupts and you have a laugh for a few minutes, and that kind of takes the pressure off, and then you'll get back into doing the thing you're doing. Or then you have the days where everyone's just in that mood where, oh, we just can't even face it today. So you just kind of almost abandon it and, go and have a drink after work, or you go for a coffee, or go out and get ice cream or something. I kind of miss those bits. But, at the same time, it's like, well, we just have to work with what we've got. So I don't know. I don't think there's any easy way. You can't use Zoom to replace that stuff. You can compensate to an extent, but you can never really get the same sense of feeling and connectedness that you get from when you're sat in the same room as someone. But we'll get through it and we'll get back to it.
And one thing I was thinking about as well, I think our lives at the moment are generally run by our calendars, and there isn't so much dropping by your desk to have chats. In a world where we're scheduling time to do things, is this now the time to actually get this in the diary as a thing? time to focus on this, time to have conversations, making that time to make this a priority?
I always was a really strict to myself. If something isn't in my diary, even if it just literally involves me, it wouldn't exist and I'd forget to do it. So for me, time management and sticking things in the diary was literally the only way I get stuff done. But that's because I'm a notorious procrastinator, and I need all of the help I can get to keep myself on track. So I would advocate doing that anyway, but it does mean you're kind of playing almost Tetris with your calendar at one point.
Not a fun game. I always lose. And Daniil, any thoughts as well on how we can kind of keep this career growth in our minds and our leaders' minds and our teams' minds through this phase, as a phase?
Yeah, of course, with remote, a lot of has changed about the processes, how you document things, how you communicate, everything went async, and like that's expected. But another thing that we found useful in our teams that we have, like if you are 8 hours in the office, you're not working 8 hours because you have a 1 hour lunch break and then you have a coffee or a chat and you're probably working, I don't know, 6 hours. And when you're at home and you're having 8 hours, you work for 8 hours. You're completely focused and you do things all the time, and that's not healthy. And I think that you should remember about it. And we started having meetings. We schedule like once a week, a 2-hour call on Monday evening to just talk to each other about the weekend and how our lives went. And then we have something like Thursday drinks also for 2 hours. And it's inside the working hours. It's not after work, where we connect with the team. And we just grab a drink online and we talk about things. We discuss travel, discuss new bike models, whatever is interesting for us. And we invest a bit more, or even way more, into person-to-person communication. And we also started one-on-one donuts. So it's like a random meeting with a colleague that you have a half an hour break during the week. It's also really great to talk and you get to know other people more. And the result of that in our Slack, we started having groups such as bread baking, and people who are baking bread at home, they're not talking about it. And then we have a group about gardening, and we have a group about clay and pottery. And they just formed around people getting to know each one better. And because of the corona, you spend a lot of time at home, you develop new hobbies, and people just started talking about it. And it's really cool because we are stronger as a team, and it's very hard times, but it's easier for us to go through that because we have new ways of offloading our stress by just being more human to each other. And that's really was one of the biggest changes in the last few months.
Yeah, that sounds really nice. Yeah, definitely enjoying all the sourdough pictures on my Instagram feed at the moment. Definitely got bread envy there. I'm just thinking specifically about an aspect. I guess some of our work is now a little bit more invisible. So whether that's work that we're doing, work that our team is doing, and work that our bosses are doing or maybe seeing, how do we make sure that where we are developing and growing, that's visible, and that where it needs recognition, it gets it? So what kind of things can we do there to make sure that all the good work that we're doing through these super intense times is, being visible?
One approach that I would absolutely recommend is get a regular show and tell in the weekly diary and encourage as many people in your organization to come along to it. This was something I was talking about, doing in person, way before coronavirus kicked in. And it's just essentially, the focus is short snippets showing what you've built, what you've learned to anyone and everyone within your organization. And it's not there to prove that you're doing stuff. It's there to show the stuff that you were doing, but people didn't necessarily realize about. And you can do a very similar format online, by again just showing a few snippets, or showing literally the thing itself if you can. I always favor demos of the actual product or the actual findings of research that you've done over a huge slide deck every day of the week. So try and get those in the diary. Get lots of different voices speaking. So don't just make it the product manager standing up and doing it. Make it your devs. If they've built something that's really cool that other teams can benefit from, get them to spend 5 minutes talking about it and take a few questions. The trick is not to scare people into thinking they have to present. It's very much about just saying, you're an expert on this. You already know this stuff. Just stand up and tell everyone about something you're really interested and really good at for 5 minutes, and then someone else will stand up and do the same thing. And if you can do that on a weekly basis for 45 minutes at least, you'll be on to a winner. And so many people will be interested in the kind of things you're doing, and you won't have to prove that you're working anymore. People will be able to see what you're doing.
Yeah, I think that's such a good idea. And it reminds me of a weekly win session that each of my squads at BBC and Children's used to do. And it was a completely democratic thing, self-organized with a Google slide that anyone could share anything. And actually, I think for the product managers, it helped to lift the lid on what they did all day. You know, and they were talking about, I was in stakeholder meetings today. I was off meeting this company. I went to user testing, and it just helped people understand what product managers were doing and gave the team the confidence that we were talking to customers and talking to users. And it felt like a really great way for everyone to celebrate everything they were doing, whether it was coding, testing, design, or filling in spreadsheets. So yeah, I agree. I think it's a great habit to get into, and I agree it can work really well digitally too. Thank you. And again, there's more fantastic suggestions coming through in the chat of systems to use to kind of keep some of that kitchen chatter and the donuts going in this new world. So I think that's fantastic. I really appreciate everyone's getting involved there. I think we're out of time now. I'm sure everyone's got meetings or things burning on the stove to get to for the lunch break. So I just want to say a huge thank you to Jock and Daniil for joining us today, to Anna at the Product Management Festival for keeping us online and running today's session, and a massive thank you to you all for taking part, for your contributions and for paying attention. Anna will follow up with an email where we'll share some of the things we talked about today, some of the links, and again, if you want to find out more about ways to get involved in our product management community, sign up for the newsletter, follow us on LinkedIn, and think about whether you want to join us in the future. You know, we're always looking for people to join our groups, speak at the conferences, get involved in things like this. So yeah, think about how you can kind of share the product management love and share your experience too. So thank you, everyone. Have a fantastic weekend. And thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.